You might assume that putting up a gate on your driveway wouldn't trigger a neighborhood uproar, but here I am, sharing this experience. The past few weeks have been nothing short of chaotic, and I still can't wrap my head around how things blew up over something so mundane. Let me begin from the start. Several months back, I chose to install a new gate at the entrance of my driveway. My home is situated at the end of a cul-de-sac, making my driveway quite lengthy and gently curving, providing some seclusion to my property. I thought a gate would enhance security and prevent the neighborhood children from frequently riding their bikes up and down my driveway. This actually happens more often than you'd expect. Plus, it simply looked attractive. Nothing flashy, just an elegant black wrought iron gate that complemented my house's style. I obtained all the required permits, thoroughly reviewed my HOA guidelines, more on that shortly, and hired a contractor to handle the installation. Everything proceeded without any hitches. The day following the gate installation, I saw Laura standing across the street, arms folded, gazing at it. Initially, I assumed she was just curious. She didn't approach me then, but there was something unsettling about her stationary stance. You know that sensation when you feel someone is observing you, but they're trying to act indifferent? Exactly. A few days later, I began receiving emails from the HOA. The first one seemed harmless, containing information about upcoming community events and reminders about lawn upkeep. However, at the very end, there was a notice. Please be aware that all exterior property modifications must adhere to HOA guidelines. Failure to obtain prior approval may lead to fines or other consequences. Strange. I had already meticulously checked the HOA rules before putting up the gate, and there was no indication that gates were forbidden. Additionally, I had never been informed by the HOA about needing prior consent for something like this. Nevertheless, I dismissed it. I assumed it was a standard reminder and paid it no mind. Soon, violation notices began to appear. One morning, I discovered a letter taped to my mailbox. It was an official-looking HOA notice, accusing me of having an unauthorized structure on my property. It was vague, offering no specific details or references to the guidelines I was supposedly violating. Of course, I reached out to the HOA for clarification, attaching photos of the gate, the city permits, and even screenshots of the guidelines. No reply. A few days later, another violation notice surfaced, this time threatening a $500 fine if I didn't remove the structure within 2 weeks. That's when I realized this wasn't merely a misunderstanding. This was targeted. I decided to address Laura at the upcoming HOA meeting. She's the president, after all, and I figured she'd clarify the issue. When I raised the concern, she offered a fake smile and said, "Oh, Michael, it's just that the gate doesn't fit with the neighborhood's aesthetic." Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. We aim to preserve property values, you understand. However, my gate wasn't the first in the neighborhood to adhere to this aesthetic. In fact, there were at least 3 other houses with driveway gates, some older, some newer, and none of them had ever caused any issues. I pointed this out, and her smile wavered for a moment before she responded. "Those were grandfathered in. Your gate is different. It's making the neighborhood appear closed off." Closed off? It's just a gate. At this stage, a few other HOA members spoke up, agreeing that my gate looked appropriate and that the guidelines didn't explicitly forbid it. Laura dismissed their input, mentioning something about needing to review the bylaws more thoroughly. It was clear she had no solid ground, but she refused to concede. After the meeting, things became even stranger. Laura began frequently appearing near my house. Once, I saw her standing on the sidewalk across the street, pretending to walk her dog while intensely staring at my gate. Another time, she drove by slowly while I was mowing the lawn. She even had the audacity to stop and say, "You know, Michael, the HOA is really enforcing violations. You might want to consider removing that gate before things escalate." Escalate? What was she implying? I wasn't going to yield. I'm not the type of person to let someone intimidate me into giving up, especially when I knew I was in the right. So, I decided to investigate further. I reviewed the HOA bylaws once more, scrutinizing them thoroughly. As I expected, there was absolutely nothing against gates. In fact, the regulations specifically mentioned that exterior modifications only required approval if they surpassed a certain height or obstructed visibility, neither of which applied to my gate. Armed with this knowledge, I sent another email to the HOA, including all board members and attaching the bylaws for reference. I made it clear that unless they could present specific evidence that my gate breached any rules, I wouldn't remove it or pay any fines. No reply. But the following morning, I saw Laura on the sidewalk again, this time holding a tape measure. "Laura, can I assist you with something?" I called out, attempting to keep my tone friendly. She startled, evidently not expecting me to be there, and stammered, "Oh, I was just, checking the easement. You know, to ensure the gate isn't obstructing it." Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The gate was well within my property boundaries, as verified by the city permit. But Laura seemed indifferent. She muttered something about property values again and walked away, leaving me standing there shaking my head. That's when it dawned on me. This wasn't about the gate. It was about control. Laura didn't like that I'd made a decision without her consent, and she was determined to make me pay for it. If you thought Laura's behavior was limited to passive-aggressive notes and sidewalk tape measuring, think again. I wasn't prepared for what followed. Honestly, I don't think she was either. It all began about a week after I saw Laura measuring my property line as if she were auditioning for an episode of CSI Suburbia. Things had been unnervingly quiet. No emails, no violation notices, no suspiciously slow drives past my house. For a moment, I almost believed she'd finally given up. But then, one bright Saturday morning, I went outside to collect the mail and noticed 2 police cars parked just a few houses down. My first thought was, yikes, I hope everyone's okay. My second thought was, why are they heading towards my house? Sure enough, 2 officers approached my driveway while Laura stood across the street, phone in hand, pretending not to watch but clearly observing. The officers were courteous but assertive. One of them, a man in his early 40s with a weary expression that said, "I don't get paid enough for this," explained they'd received a complaint about a structure blocking public access. I couldn't help but laugh. "You mean my gate? The one that's entirely on my property and doesn't block anything?" The officer shrugged. "We're just here to inspect it." I led them over to the gate, highlighting the clear property line markers and the fact that the gate was a solid 3 feet inside those boundaries. I even showed them the permits I'd obtained from the city, along with the email correspondence confirming everything was approved. The second officer, a younger man who seemed unimpressed, nodded and said, "Yeah, this doesn't appear to be an issue to me." Meanwhile, Laura was still lingering across the street. When the officers glanced in her direction, she waved as if at a parade. "You might want to speak with her," I suggested. The older officer sighed, muttered something under his breath, and walked across the street. I stayed where I was, leaning against the gate with my arms crossed, observing the situation unfold. Laura put on her most concerned citizen act, gesturing dramatically toward my house, and at one point, pulling out what looked like a binder. I couldn't hear all of her comments, but I caught phrases like devaluing the neighborhood, dangerous precedent, and "I've had multiple complaints." The officer listened patiently for a few minutes before interrupting her. He said something that caused her face to flush bright red, and she immediately ceased speaking. The younger officer returned to me and said, "You're all set. Sorry for the disturbance." And just like that, they left. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Laura's determination to be a nuisance. A few days later, I received an email announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss recent neighborhood issues. The email didn't specify my name, but it was obvious what it was about. I decided to attend, not because I expected anything productive, but because I wanted to see how far Laura was willing to take this absurdity. The meeting took place at the community center, and the atmosphere was tense from the moment I entered. Laura was already there, sitting at the head of the table with her dreaded binder and a smug look that made me want to flip the table. Emily, one of the more reasonable HOA board members, gave me a sympathetic smile as I took my seat. Robert, a neighbor I had always gotten along with, leaned over and whispered, "You're about to be the star of the show." The meeting began with Laura delivering a prepared statement about the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards and ensuring community harmony. It was all very vague and theatrical, and she didn't directly mention my gate at first. And then she opened her binder and began flipping through the pages. "We've recently had an issue with an unauthorized structure that violates HOA guidelines," she stated, looking straight at me. I raised my hand. "Are you referring to my gate?" Laura hesitated, clearly not expecting me to call her out so swiftly. "Well, if the shoe fits." I couldn't help but smirk. "Okay, let's discuss the guidelines then, because I've read them thoroughly and there's nothing that prohibits gates. In fact, there are 3 other homes in this neighborhood with gates, and none of them have ever been a problem." Laura's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Those were grandfathered in. Your gate is a new installation, and it's—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Not in keeping with the neighborhood's aesthetic." I glanced around the room. "Does anyone else here think my gate is an eyesore?" Emily spoke up. "I think it looks fine. It's well maintained and matches the style of your house." Robert nodded. "Honestly, I didn't even notice it until all this started." Laura's face reddened again. "This isn't a popularity contest," she snapped. "It's about the rules." I leaned back in my chair. "Great, then show me the rule I'm violating." She flipped through her binder again, muttering under her breath, but didn't present anything concrete. That's because there wasn't anything. As the meeting progressed, it became evident that most of the other board members, and even some neighbors, were weary of Laura's antics. At one point, Robert said, "It feels like you're targeting Michael for no reason. If there's a legitimate issue, just state it. Otherwise, drop it." Laura seemed on the verge of losing her composure. "I'm just trying to do my job," she responded through gritted teeth. "Your job is to enforce the rules fairly," I retorted, "not to invent them as you go along." By the meeting's end, Laura was visibly shaken. The board decided to drop the issue entirely, and Emily even apologized to me afterward, saying, "I think she's just used to people not pushing back." Following the emergency HOA meeting, where Laura's attempts to target me failed, I believed she might finally relent. For a week, everything was pleasantly normal. No emails, no violation notices, no creepy drives by my house while she pretended to inspect my landscaping. I let my guard down. Big mistake. One Saturday afternoon, while I was outside washing my car, Robert, my neighbor, approached me. He looked somewhat uneasy, glancing over his shoulder as if he didn't want anyone to see him talking to me. "Hey, Michael," he began. "Can I ask you something odd?" "Sure," I replied. "What's up?" Robert hesitated. "Have you noticed someone walking around your property at night?" "What do you mean?" "Look, I don't want to seem paranoid, but a few nights ago I was on my porch and I saw someone near your gate. They had a flashlight. I was initially unsure how to interpret that. Was someone genuinely snooping around my house? Or was Robert mistaken? Either way, I thanked him and decided to stay vigilant. That night, I set up a motion-activated camera near the gate. I wasn't expecting to catch anything, but I thought it was worth a try. Sure enough, the first 2 nights showed nothing unusual, just some raccoons rummaging through my trash cans. But on the 3rd night, I struck gold. The camera captured Laura. She was dressed in black, seriously, as if on a secret mission, and was shining a flashlight on my gate. At one point, she even attempted to tug on it, as if she believed she could somehow remove it with her bare hands. I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't just petty behavior. It was downright insane. The next morning, I sent the footage to Emily, the reasonable board member who had supported me during the HOA meeting. I kept my message brief. "Not sure if this is something the board wants to address, but I thought you should see it." Emily called me back less than an hour later. "Michael," she said, sounding both shocked and amused, "you're not going to believe this, but Laura has been filing violation notices about your gate without board approval. We're having an internal meeting about it tonight." That evening, I received a call from Robert. "You need to attend the HOA meeting," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. "It's not technically open to homeowners, but trust me, you'll want to hear this." I decided to stay home and play it cool, but Robert kept me informed via text. Apparently, when the board confronted Laura about the violation notices, she completely lost her composure. She attempted to claim she was merely doing her job as president, but Emily pointed out that issuing violations without board approval was a blatant breach of HOA protocol. Then, Robert texted me something that made my jaw drop. "She's accusing you of forging the permits for the gate. Emily is asking her for proof." I couldn't believe it. Laura was so desperate to win that she was now accusing me of committing a crime. But it worsened. According to Robert, Laura presented a stack of documents she claimed were evidence of my unauthorized gate. However, those documents were entirely fabricated. Robert texted again. "Emily just called the city planning office. They're confirming your permits are legitimate." That's when things truly fell apart for Laura. With her evidence crumbling and the board turning against her, Laura did the one thing I didn't anticipate. She doubled down. "I'm just trying to protect this community," she shouted, according to Robert. "Michael is making a mockery of the HOA. That gate is damaging property values." By this point, even Laura's few remaining supporters were distancing themselves from her. Emily called for an immediate vote to remove Laura as president, and it passed unanimously. But the best part? Remember how Laura had been sneaking around my property at night? Well, the board was not pleased about that. Emily informed her that the HOA would be conducting an official investigation into her behavior, including her late-night inspections. Laura stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. The next day, I received an email from the HOA officially apologizing for Laura's conduct and confirming that all violation notices related to my gate had been nullified. Emily even visited my house personally to apologize and assure me that Laura was no longer in any position of authority. But the icing on the cake? A few weeks later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Laura had moved out. Apparently, she couldn't handle the humiliation of being ousted, and her house was already listed for sale. Now, every time I drive into my driveway and see my gate, I can't help but smile. Have you ever encountered neighbors who act like they own the entire block? Almost like HOA royalty or something? I always thought such tales were blown out of proportion, until I met Karen. About 6 months ago, I relocated to this neighborhood, and honestly, it appeared flawless on paper. Quiet streets, immaculate lawns, a reasonable commute. Everything I desired. Sure, there was an HOA, which I typically dislike, but their regulations were straightforward. Maintain your lawn, avoid painting your house neon green, sensible stuff. I figured as long as I adhered to the guidelines, I'd be fine. Oh, how mistaken I was. It all began roughly 2 weeks ago when I purchased a new workbench for my garage, something I'd been eager to add for a long time. I'm passionate about woodworking, and now that I had the space, I was ready to get back into it. The delivery truck arrived late in the afternoon, so I parked my vehicle in the driveway to unload it. It was somewhat inconvenient because the workbench was massive, requiring me to rearrange items in the garage to make space. I wasn't obstructing the sidewalk or anything, just parked in my own driveway, taking my time. After about 20 minutes, I heard a sharp, abrupt voice behind me. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned around to see Karen. She's a middle-aged woman with the stereotypical haircut you'd expect. You know the one, arms crossed, lips pursed as if she just bit into a lemon. She was glaring at me like I'd committed a grave offense. Perplexed, I replied, Just unloading some stuff. Can I help you?" Her eyes narrowed and she pointed a finger at my truck. "You can help me by moving that. You're blocking access." At this moment, I was still trying to understand her perspective. Maybe she was referring to something I wasn't noticing. I glanced around, but my truck wasn't obstructing anything. The driveway was clear, the sidewalk was unobstructed. The only thing I might have been blocking was the view of my own house. "I'm sorry, blocking access to what?" I asked, genuinely curious. Karen rolled her eyes so dramatically that I was surprised she didn't injure herself. "The sidewalk. This is a shared neighborhood space, and you're obstructing it. People need to walk through here. Not one to escalate matters immediately. I calmly explained. The sidewalk's clear. I'm parked in my driveway. No one's blocked from anything. Big mistake. Apparently Karen wasn't interested in logic. Her voice grew louder. This is my neighborhood, and I don't appreciate you bringing this mess into it. We have standards here. She gestured vaguely at my truck, the workbench, and I suppose my very presence. At this point, I was starting to get annoyed. I maintained an even tone, but remained firm. With all due respect, I'm parked on my own property and I'm not breaking any rules. If I am, you're welcome to show me where it says so. Her face turned red. I don't need to show you anything. I'm the HOA president. You're violating neighborhood standards and I will be reporting this. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. I don't know about you, but the whole "I'm the HOA president" thing didn't exactly intimidate me. Still, not wanting to provoke further conflict, I simply responded, "Okay, you do that," and continued unloading my workbench. But Karen wasn't finished. She lingered for another 5 minutes, arms crossed, muttering about disrespectful newcomers and declining property values. I did my best to ignore her, but it was incredibly awkward. Eventually, she left, but not before snapping a few photos of my truck and my house. That's when unease set in. I thought that was the end of it. She would probably vent about me at the next HOA meeting and move on. However, the next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to my door. HOA violation notice, unauthorized vehicle parking. It stated I was violating HOA rules by obstructing community pathways and threatened a fine if I didn't address the issue immediately. The kicker? It referenced a rule about common areas, which didn't apply to private driveways. I double-checked the bylaws, and yes, I was correct. Nothing I did violated the rules. So I sent a courteous email to the HOA board, attaching photos of my driveway and explaining the situation. I included Karen in the email for transparency. Her reply came within an hour, a terse 2-line message stating I needed to respect the rules or face further consequences. There was no acknowledgement of the actual bylaws or any evidence supporting her claim, just vague threats. Still, I chose not to let it bother me. I documented everything. Photos, emails, timestamps, just in case. But then, things started to get stranger. The day after my email, I noticed Karen standing at the edge of my property, staring at my house. She wasn't doing anything, not interacting with anyone, just standing there with arms crossed, glaring at my front door as if she wanted to burn it down with her stare. When I stepped outside to ask if she needed something, she spun around and walked away without a word. Later that night, I saw her walking her dog, or pretending to, right past my house for the 3rd time in an hour. Then tire tracks appeared on my lawn. I decided to pause the story here because things truly began to escalate afterward. Suffice it to say, Karen wasn't satisfied with sending passive-aggressive emails, and neither was I. Asterisk, asterisk, update, asterisk, asterisk. You might think that after our initial confrontation, Karen would have calmed down or moved on to another target. But no, things were only beginning. The morning after finding that bogus violation notice, I had already emailed the HOA board to dispute the claim and believed it would be the end of it. However, when I went outside to retrieve the mail, I noticed something unusual. Fresh tire tracks on my lawn. Initially, I thought I was overreacting. Perhaps the tracks had been there for a while unnoticed. But they were right at the edge of my driveway, too precise to be random. Someone had driven onto my grass, and it wasn't me. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal, but it felt intentional, like a message. I dismissed it for the time being, thinking it might have been a delivery driver, and went about my day. However, the second violation notice arrived. HOA violation notice, neighborhood aesthetics. This time, the issue wasn't my truck, but my garage. Karen accused me of conducting unauthorized projects that were harming the neighborhood's appearance. Honestly, this made me laugh. All I had done was rearrange some tools and build a small shelving unit inside my closed garage. There was no noise, no mess, nothing visible from the street. How she knew what I was doing was baffling. At this point, I realized Karen wasn't just making idle threats. She was watching me closely. This realization left me both annoyed and genuinely unsettled. Who has the time to obsess over their neighbors like this? I decided to take action. I emailed the HOA board again, attaching more photos and politely requesting clarification on the alleged rule I was breaking. I even offered to show them my garage to prove there was nothing unaesthetic about it. Once again, I copied Karen on the email, hoping she might realize I wasn't someone to be easily intimidated. Her response was almost immediate, a short, passive-aggressive reply stating, "The board has every right to enforce community standards. Please comply or face further consequences." It wasn't just the email that bothered me. It was how quickly she responded, as if she were waiting by her computer for me to push back. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was personal for her, and I had no idea why. A few days later, while cleaning my truck, I noticed Karen walking her dog past my house. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, but it was the third time I'd seen her pass by within an hour. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. Each time she slowed just enough to glance at my house, lingering a bit too long to seem natural. It was unsettling. I told myself it was probably a coincidence, but it kept happening. By the end of the week, it was clear this wasn't a coincidence. Karen was monitoring me. At one point, I decided to confront her. The next time I saw her walking by, I stepped outside and casually waved. "Everything okay, Karen?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She froze for a second, clearly surprised, then forced a fake, tight-lipped smile. "Oh, just making sure everyone's following the rules," she replied. "Right," I responded, letting the sarcasm show. "Well, if you see anything out of line, let me know." She didn't respond, just muttered something under her breath and walked away. Not long after that interaction, I received an unexpected knock at my door. It was Amy, one of my neighbors. We had exchanged a few friendly waves, but I didn't know her well. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she didn't want anyone to see her. "Can I come in?" she asked. I let her in, and she wasted no time getting to the point. "I heard what happened with Karen," she said. "She's done this before, you know." According to Amy, Karen had a history of bullying new residents. She'd find minor violations and use them as excuses to harass people until they either complied or moved out. Most folks didn't resist. They just paid fines or did whatever Karen wanted to avoid the hassle. "And what happens if you don't?" I asked. Amy hesitated before responding. "She gets creative," she finally said. "Fake violation notices, nasty emails, even complaints to the city about your property. She'll make your life hell." If Amy's account was accurate, Karen wasn't stopping until she achieved her goals, and I had no intention of giving her that satisfaction. A few days later, things escalated further. I woke up to find my trash cans knocked over and garbage scattered across my lawn. Initially, I thought it might have been raccoons or another animal. But then I noticed something odd. The lids weren't just off, they were missing entirely. That's when I reviewed my security camera footage, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. There was Karen in the dead of night, dragging my trash cans into the street and dumping their contents everywhere. She even kicked one over before storming off. I sat there watching the video, feeling both furious and baffled. Who does something like this? Over a parking spot? For no reason? Risk asterisk the oude risk. A final update. After witnessing Karen dumping my trash in the street, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and replaying the video repeatedly, wondering how she thought she could get away with it. It wasn't just the act itself that infuriated me. It was the sheer audacity. I realized I had two choices: let it slide and hope she'd eventually lose interest, or take a stand and show her I wasn't someone she could bully. Honestly, I was tired of defending myself. I decided it was time to involve the authorities. I went to the local police station with my phone loaded with all the evidence I'd gathered. The emails, the violation notices, the footage of her vandalism, and even photos of the tire tracks on my lawn. I wasn't sure how they'd respond. After all, this was HOA drama, not high-stakes crime. But to my surprise, the officer I spoke to took it seriously. After viewing the footage, he nodded and said, "This is definitely vandalism. Let's file a report." The officer mentioned they'd follow up and advised me to avoid direct confrontation with Karen in the meantime. I agreed, though I couldn't help but wonder how she'd react when the police showed up at her door. While waiting for the authorities to take action, I decided to address the HOA board directly. Karen liked to act as if she represented the entire HOA, but technically, she was just the president. The board still had to vote on decisions, and I was betting they'd be much less inclined to support her once they saw the evidence. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Friday, and I made sure to arrive early. I entered with a folder full of printouts and a USB drive containing all the footage. Karen was already there, seated at the head of the table with her usual smug expression. But the moment she saw me, her smile faltered. "Oh, Shane," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What brings you here?" "I think you know," I replied, taking a seat. The meeting began with the usual mundane updates, landscaping budgets, community events, all the typical stuff. But when it was time for open concerns, I raised my hand. "I'd like to address a pattern of harassment from the HOA president," I stated calmly, presenting my folder. The room fell silent. Karen's face turned bright red, but she didn't say a word as I detailed everything. The fake violation notices, the late-night trash vandalism, the constant surveillance. I even played the footage from my phone, showing everyone Karen dumping my trash like an unhinged raccoon. When I finished, one of the other board members, an older gentleman named Frederick, cleared his throat. "Karen, is this true?" he asked, looking genuinely shocked. Karen stammered, This is being blown out of proportion. He's a troublemaker, always breaking rules." "What rules?" I interrupted, maintaining my steady voice. "Please, Karen, tell us exactly what rule I've broken." She couldn't, and the board saw through it. The next day, I received a call from the officer handling my case. He informed me they had spoken to Karen and issued her a formal warning for vandalism. Apparently, she had tried to play the victim, claiming she was merely protecting the neighborhood, but the footage didn't lie. The officer didn't provide many details, but it was clear Karen wasn't as confident when faced with law enforcement. That should have been the end of it, but Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. A week later, I woke up to find a bright orange sign staked into my front yard. It read, "Violation, property in disarray," in large, bold letters. Below it was a handwritten note. "Failure to comply will result in further action." I couldn't help but laugh. At this point, it was just pathetic. Did she really think this sign would intimidate me after everything that had already transpired? Instead of removing the sign, I took a picture of it and emailed it to the entire HOA board with the subject line, "Is this what we're spending HOA funds on?" Within an hour, Frederick called me. "Shane, I want you to know the board is holding an emergency vote to remove Karen as president. This has gone too far." The emergency meeting was brief and to the point. The board unanimously voted to strip Karen of her position, citing abuse of power and misconduct. She didn't even attend to defend herself, which was probably her smartest move throughout this ordeal. After the meeting, Amy, the neighbor who had warned me, approached me and said, "I think you just did this whole neighborhood a favor.